My grandfather was Sir Arthur Austen, and he was captain of the Carpathia, who rescued all the survivors from the Titanic. He was several hundred miles away from the Titanic at the time. The fact that they were able to get a message on the wireless was due purely and simply to luck, really. The Marconi operator, he was just getting ready for bed and went to switch off the wireless and heard this message that the Titanic was sinking.
We boarded on the Titanic on April 10th, 1912. It was Mrs. Stone who got the tickets in London and told me, delighted, that we would board on the nicest liner. The preceding nights, I dreamed about death. A premonition, maybe. During the short-lived 4-day voyage of this splendid transatlantic liner, it was all about celebrations. Ceremonial dinners of royal luxury. The dresses were sumptuous. It was a display of shining jewels and rivers of diamonds worthy of oriental splendor. Towards 11 o'clock, Mrs. Stone and I went to bed. 3/4 of an hour later, as the liner was cruising at full speed, a terrifying shock threw us out of bed. We were intending to find out what was happening when a passing officer told us, "It is nothing, return to your cabin." I replied, "Listen to that noise. It sounds like water is flowing into the ship."
So he got all the crew to ready the lifeboats and to get hold of doctors. They had one on board as a part of the crew, but there were 2 others on board as passengers. The crew would give their accommodation up to the rescued. Of course, they had no idea how many would survive. Eventually, they got there. There had been no more messages for some while, and I think they were still hoping, of course, that it was still afloat. They sighted their first lifeboat, and they realized then that it had sunk, and it was unbelievable.
April 18th, 1912. Dear Marion, I was just going to bed. Madame and Sir Cosmo were upon top deck A, and I on E, the bottom deck for saloon passengers, when I felt a shudder. Then 2 men came up and told me that we had run into an iceberg, but were quite safe. I stood there for 20 minutes quietly waiting. Then the water was on my deck, coming along the corridor, and I found all the people running up and down the stairs. Oh, Marion, that was a sickening moment. I felt myself go like marble. Sir Cosmo then took us up to top deck. Crowds of people were up there. Several lifeboats had been lowered. They were preparing the last 2 on that side of the ship, the starboard side. They cried out, "Any more women?" and saw us and came to try and drag Madame and I from Sir Cosmo. But Madame clung to Sir Cosmo. An officer started to swing off a little boat called the emergency boat. He saw us and ordered us in. The dear, brave officer gave us orders to row away from the sinking ship to at least 200 yards away. He afterwards, poor, dear, brave fellow, shot himself. We saw the whole thing and watched the tremendous thing sink quickly. Then there were terrible screams, explosions, and all darkness. Then followed the awful cries and screams of the 1,600 dear souls fighting for their lives in the water. Oh, I shall never forget that awful moment.
So they'd readied everything so that the passengers could come up aboard easily, and they were prepared for small children and for the sick, or, you know, that they would be able to get them up as well. And when the survivors of that lifeboat arrived on deck, there was only 25 in that lifeboat, which actually had room for 40. So that really was very sad.
Luckily for both Stuart and me, Dorothy held onto my hand and demanded that we get into the boat. "We won't go unless you do," she said. "What do you say?" I asked Stuart. "What's the difference? We may as well go along with them." Finding seats for ourselves, we sat in the lifeboat designed for 65 persons. After 19 people had finally made up their minds and had been lowered into the boat, then began a jerky descent to the surface of the ocean around 60 feet below. For the next hour and a half, we just sat there and drifted further away. Suddenly, all the lights dipped simultaneously to a pale glow. A moment or two later, everyone watching in the lifeboat saw silhouetted against the starlit sky the stern of the ship rise perpendicularly into the air from about midship. Then, with a prolonged rush and a roar like 10,000 tons of coal sliding down a metal chute 100 feet long, the great ship went down and out of sight and disappeared beneath the surface of the ocean.
2 or 3 were actually dead in the lifeboats when he picked them up, which was a bit sad. But of course, being a captain, he had a service for them. They were welcoming all the survivors, blankets and hot drinks, and taking them into comfortable accommodation inside, and they gave up their cabins. So it was really a very caring attitude that they all shared.
When we were gathered in the dining room of the Carpathia, it was a very painful scene. Young women were there without their husbands, mothers without their sons. A young mother whom her wave had snatched her child from her had gone insane. Her hopes raised as a child was presented to her which was not her own.
When they got back to New York, of course, the press wanted to get on board, and he wouldn't let them because he was so concerned about the passengers having been through such a trauma. They didn't realise what a thing it was that, you know, the Titanic going down and rescue, because that's all grandfather thought about, was looking after the passengers. And of course, it was, well, quite a welcome.
From the 2,229 passengers and crew, only 745 were saved.
He saved me.
And he saved me.
And he saved me.